And Ryan, are we ready to go?
Yes, we are streaming and the meeting is open. So good afternoon and welcome to the New York City Planning Commission review session for Monday, March 15th, 2021. The time is 1 p.m. and a quorum is present. The first item on our agenda is a certification of a city map amendment in Manhattan Community District 12. Our presenter is Philip Montgomery.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Next slide, please. For certification, I have an application by the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey seeking an amendment to the city map. The proposed amendment involves the elimination, discontinuance, and closing of multiple streets near the New York approach to the George Washington Bridge in Manhattan Community District 12. The proposed amendment would facilitate the construction of new ADA accessible bicycle and pedestrian access ramps to the GWB and also the disposition of city-owned property to the Port Authority. Next slide, please. The project site is located in an R72 zoning district at the New York approach to the GWB. Land uses to the north, east, and south of the project are primarily residential. Fort Washington Park is located directly west of the project area. The nearest mass transit includes the M4 bus with stops at West 175th and West 177th Streets. The A subway line has stops at West 175th and West 181st Streets. Next slide, please. This is an aerial view of the project area outlined in yellow. Next slide, please. So the project is part of an 11 project restoring the George plan sponsored by the Port Authority to rehabilitate the 90-year-old bridge and keep it in a state of good repair. Improvements include separating bicycle and pedestrian users on the north and south side of the bridge to provide improved ADA accessible pedestrian and bicycle ramps on both the New York and New Jersey approaches, the introduction of new entry plazas, new viewing platforms, and safety fencing. Next slide, please. The project subject to this application involves the construction of new entry plazas and ADA accessible ramps to the north and south approaches to the GWB as part of the overall rehabilitation of the West 178th and West 179th Street vehicular ramps and bus terminal. Next slide, please. The vehicular ramps and terminal were constructed between 1958 and 1962. As part of the GWB's lower deck expansion that connected the bridge to local streets, the Henry Hudson Parkway, and provided a direct connection to the Cross Bronx Expressway via a new bridge across the Harlem River. As part of the 1950s and 60s construction project, property rights were transferred between the city and Port Authority within the project corridor. However, neither the city nor the Port Authority have any records of a formal transfer of the mapped city-owned street properties that are the subject of this application. Both the city and Port Authority have operated as if the Port Authority owns the subject property, as they have maintained the area since 1962. The proposed city map amendment would allow for the subsequent transfer of the city-owned property to the Port Authority and would also update the city map. The proposed city map amendment will have no effect on access to private property, as no residential or commercial properties receive access from the subject streets. Construction on the two ramps is currently underway. Next slide, please. So this is a diagram of the new bicycle and pedestrian ramps in the darker outline, with the streets proposed to be demapped and transferred to the Port Authority in gray. Next slide, please. So this is a slide showing operations during construction. Phase 1 currently in effect. The north walk is closed. The south walk is open to bicycle and pedestrians. Phase 2 will open the north walk to bicycles and pedestrians while the south walk is closed. And then phase 3 is the future completion with bicycles on the north walk and pedestrians on the south walk. Next slide, please. This is a more recent aerial showing the two new bicycle and pedestrian ramps under construction. Next slide, please. So this is a current picture of the West 178th Street ramp under construction. In the foreground, you can see the new ramp bits in place, and off to the left is the existing access ramp. Next slide, please. So this is a On the left is a current picture of the proposed, or excuse me, of the closed access stairs on West 179th Street. And on the right, the new West 180th Street entry plaza and ramp that is under construction. Next slide, please. Which is a rendering of the West 178th Street entry plaza. Next slide, please. And lastly, a rendering of the West 180th Street entry plaza. And this concludes my presentation, and I will be happy to take your questions. Thank you.
I know that we have quite a number of bicyclists on the commission, and as anyone who has tried to navigate the spaghetti there, this is such a welcome project. Any questions or comments from the commission? Commissioner Burney.
I'd just like to echo that, Chair. I think it's really commendable improvement to the bridge, and I think a huge boon to cyclists that have to get over there. I would just point out one thing, though. It seems to me that the Port Authority owes the city back rent from the 1950s, you know, for occupying all that space without actually having transferred it. So I think we should calculate that sum and contribute that to the city's coffers, you know.
I like your entrepreneurial approach. Other questions or comments? Okay, then this application is certified. Thank you, Philip.
Yes, thank you.
All right, thanks. The second item on the agenda is a certification of a zoning map and zoning text amendment in Manhattan Community District 9. Our presenter is Ryan Cody.
And actually, before Brian begins his presentation, I want to note that the department supports the development of much needed housing, and including MIH affordable housing on this site. It's in a transit-rich neighborhood, but nonetheless, we have concerns that the proposed R9A zoning district is too aggressive, given the project's location and its surrounding context. We have repeatedly relayed this message to the applicant, which nonetheless wants to go forward to seek R9A. The department believes that there are alternate zoning districts that could still promote housing development on this site, but be more in line with the neighborhood context. And so we look forward to discussing alternatives with the commission when this application returns for a pre-public hearing review session. And with that, over to you, Ryan.
Thank you again, Chair Lago, and good afternoon, commissioners. We can go to the next slide. Thank you. So this is a project that is set for development of 170 feet, 17-story residential development in Manhattan Community District 9, which is the Hamilton Heights section of West Harlem. Is on 142nd Street, and it's being proposed by Soma 142 with land use representative Eric Palatnik. Next slide, please. The proposed actions necessary to facilitate this application and this development are a map amendment from R6A to R9A and a zoning text amendment to map MIH. The project area was previously rezoned in 2012 as part of the West Harlem rezoning from R8 to R6A in order to preserve the neighborhood character, the neighborhood scale. As you well know, there are many brownstones, many existing historic districts in this neighborhood. And as you can tell on the map to the right, the surrounding area is largely R8, but then with a smattering of these R6A and R7A districts, which are largely there to preserve historic districts or to preserve the scale and character of the blocks themselves. The project site is adjacent to Riverside Drive and Riverside Park, and then is also a block away from Broadway, which has access to the MTA 1 train on 145th Street. Next slide, please. Here's just the zoning change map, which is coterminous. The zoning change is coterminous with the project site itself. As you can see, it'd be a chunk of that block on 142nd Street that extends then onto Riverside Drive, and it is coterminous with the project site itself. Next slide, please. Mandatory inclusionary housing, which would be mapped as part of this project, is also coterminous with the development site, or with the project site, excuse me. The applicant is proposing use of mandatory inclusionary housing option 1, which requires that 25% of units be made available to individuals or households with incomes averaging 60% of the area median income, which is roughly about $54,600 for a household of 2. Affordable units would be included in a mix of ranging from studio, 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom, and 3-bedroom units throughout this site, development. And we'll talk about that a little bit further as well. Next slide, please. The project site currently contains 5 tax lots, which consist of lot 15, 16, and 115, which are all vacant 3-story residential buildings, as you see to the right, which are the buildings to be demolished, that would be demolished as part of this project. Lot 14, which is on the left-hand side of that image, is currently vacant land. And then the existing lot 17 would be preserved and will remain, and unutilized development rights from that parcel would be utilized in accordance with a zoning lot development agreement. There would be 8 rent stabilized units that would be preserved in lot 17. The total project area is 7,393 square feet. Next slide, please. The proposed project, as mentioned before, would be a 17-story, 170-foot residential development totaling roughly 60,000 square feet at 8.11 FAR. The residential development would contain 81 residential units, and 20 would be that MIH option 1 permanently affordable units. The building would also contain amenities for residents on the 1st and 2nd floor, and the proposed R9A zoning lot is in a transit zone, so it would not require parking to be provided, and no parking is being considered for this proposal. Next slide, please. Then diving into the specifics a little bit more, the residential unit breakdown is 42 studios, 18 1-bedrooms, 19 2-bedrooms, and 2 3-bedroom units. The first floor would contain a residential lobby, laundry room, bicycle storage room, and space for mechanical equipment, all for the residents in this building. And then the second floor would include an indoor recreation room, an outdoor recreation area also for the residents of this building. The 3rd through 17th floor would include all the residential units, and there'd be a mix of the unit styles throughout those floors. Next slide, please. And then here we just want to give you a rough idea of what the surrounding context looks like in terms of building heights. As you can see, there's quite a range, given that there is a range of districts from R6A, R7A, R8. As you can see, immediately adjacent to the south is a building that is 12 stories, 140 feet tall, and then there's a few others. There's also then buildings around 60 to 75 feet in those R6A districts. So quite a variation in terms of what the building heights are, but want to just give you a rough idea of what that looks like in this context. Again, this development site would be 170 feet tall. Next slide, please. And then finally, here is the block itself. So that picture on the left, again, are the 3 buildings that would be demolished. That would be demolished as part of this project. The 4th to the right is the building that would remain with rent stabilized 8 units. And then these other pictures just give you an idea of what the block looks like, mostly medium rise apartment buildings, as well as existing brownstones. So with that, I will take any questions. Thank you.
Vice Chair Knuckles.
Thank you. Ryan, that's Ryan, right?
Yes, yes.
Do we have any studies of this proposed project if it were to be built under an R8 designation?
I do not
pursuant
believe
to R8.
I do not believe so. I can double check, but I do not believe so at this time.
So we don't know how many units would be yielded or anything like that.
Not sure at this moment. I could certainly get back to you with that information.
Okay. No, it's funny, I haven't been on 142nd Street in a while, but I know generally the incline between Riverside Drive and Broadway in the 140s is quite steep. Though these pictures and the renderings certainly doesn't reflect that. I guess I'll have to revisit it. My recollection of it is that those inclines are very much steeper than what's depicted here. But maybe my recollection is fuzzy.
Right, there certainly is. I mean, there's a lot of variation throughout that area for sure. So I can agree to that. I think at that level, you have Riverside Park to the left, and then there's quite a steep drop off after that. But I do think throughout the area, there's quite a bit of variation as far as that for sure.
Yeah, and I'm speaking really between Riverside and going east up to Broadway.
Right.
But well, for me, I'd certainly be curious to see what a massing would look like pursuant to R8.
Okay. Yeah, we'll certainly keep that in mind for the applicants as well.
Commissioner Levin.
Yes, well, so picking up on the question of the slope down the hill, I was struck reading the EAS because I was curious about that row of townhouses or of houses, that this is a row of 15 houses that are contributing properties in a proposed West Harlem Historic District. And the EAS notes that all 15 houses survive with a high degree of architectural integrity. And I believe they were designed to step down at 3-foot intervals all the way down the street. So I do think that, and the downzoning in 2012 was, specifically blocked out that row of 15 townhouses and downzoned it to the R6A that it presently carries, precisely to avoid the result that this application would have. So I look forward to learning much more about how the three buildings that are proposed for demolition came to be vacant, and about how we integrate historic preservation concerns and the desire that we all acknowledge to produce more housing. I am sure we'll hear much more about this as part of the public review, but there are a lot of questions I have about this.
Absolutely, thank you.
And and I would acknowledge that in the context of Riverside Drive, a larger building makes a tremendous amount of sense. But in the context of this row of 15 houses, it looks somewhat different. So we have to, as we always do here, have to balance all of these concerns. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner, for echoing some of the concerns that the department has. Commissioner Dweck.
Thank you. I'll go a step further than Commissioner Knuckles and Vice Chair Knuckles and say, do we have any studies on what an R7A would look like on that end of that block? So we can have the applicant, when they come back to us, give us some idea of how that would look at an R7A level. I'd appreciate that.
Yeah, that will certainly be discussed, and that's certainly a sentiment that's been echoed before as well. So we'll certainly encourage them to look into that.
Thank you.
Not seeing any other hands, we will certify this application.
Thank you.
Right. Thanks, Ryan. The third item on the agenda is a pre-hearing review of a zoning map and zoning text amendment in Queens Community District 1. Our presenter is Joy Chen. I'll note that Commissioner Ramprasad is recused on this item.
Good afternoon, commissioners. Next slide, please. This is a private application by Madrep Associates back for pre-hearing review for a zoning map amendment from a C44A district to a C44D district located at 3002 Newtown Avenue, Queens Community District 1. A zoning text amendment is also being proposed to Appendix F to establish a mandatory affordable housing area. The requested actions would facilitate a new mixed-use 11-story building containing 104 dwelling units, 8,400 square feet of ground floor retail, approximately 2,000 square feet of community facility space in the cellar, and 30 parking spaces. The proposed development would provide 26 units of permanently affordable housing under MIH Option 1. Next slide. The project area is situated within a medium-density mixed-use area in Astoria, 1 block away from the N and the W subway station located at 31st Street and 30th Avenue. 1 block southeast of the project area is 30th Avenue, which is a well-established active commercial corridor. Typical development along the avenues here include 2 to 6-story mixed-use buildings with ground floor retail uses. There are also some taller 6 to 10-story mixed-use buildings to the north and south, adjacent to 31st Street and Newtown Avenue. These are 2 wide streets. Along the mid-blocks, there are lower 1 and 2 family homes, as well as multifamily walk-up apartments. The project area is also well connected to major roads, including Astoria Boulevard, 1 mile to the north, connecting Astoria to the Grand Central Parkway and the RFK Bridge. Next slide. The proposed rezoning area outlined in the black dashed lines is bounded by Newtown Avenue to the north, 31st Street to the east, 30th Street to the west, and 30th Avenue to the south. The project area was rezoned to C4-4A from an R6 district under the 2010 Astoria rezoning. Recent development trends within the C4-4A district have primarily consisted of new ground floor retail uses and market rate residential uses. An example of a higher density commercial development is 3119 Newtown Avenue, which is a block away from the project area, known as Pastilli Towers. And this is a 10-story Class A office building that was completed in 2011. And there are also several large institutional uses in the surrounding area, such as Mount Sinai Hospital, elementary schools, high schools, and also a small park, Athens Square, across 30th Street from the proposed rezoning area. Next slide. The tax map shows the irregularly shaped 15,825 square feet development site outlined in red. The project area consists of 4 tax lots. Block 595, lots 19, 26, and 27 are owned by the applicant, and a sliver of lot 10 is owned by Verizon. Next slide. These photos show the 5- and 7-story apartment buildings at the corner of 30th Street and Newtown Avenue. Next slide. These photos show the existing Finkelstein tire shop and office along Newtown Avenue and 31st Street. Next slide. The proposed development consists of an 11-story mixed-use building with 104 dwelling units, including 26 permanently affordable units, ground floor retail uses, and cellar level community facility space. The proposed development would have an FAR of 7.19 and rise to a total height of 115 feet. The proposed building height is lower than the maximum building height of 145 feet permitted in a C4-4D district. The massing shows how the bulk of the building's density will be highest at 11 stories facing the elevated subway at 31st Street and Newtown Avenue, and then it lowers down to 6 stories facing 30th Street, where there is a lower density residential context. Next slide. The site plan shows a dual corner layout, which allows for a large footprint, and this also decreases the overall building. Next slide. The ground floor of the proposed development would include 8,400 square feet of retail space with entrances at both 31st Street and Newtown Avenue, a residential lobby at Newtown Avenue, and a community facility entrance on 30th Street. The cellar parking would also be accessed via 30th Street. Next slide. The section illustrates the distribution of uses on each floor. The ground floor and basement would have retail and community facility uses. Floors 2 through 11 would be residential. When this project was certified in December of 2020, the applicants had an agreement with the Astoria Performing Arts Center, intended to locate a theater in the cellar. However, per a letter submitted by the applicant and included in your briefing materials post-certification, the Astoria Performing Arts Center decided to move to an alternate location that had recently been vacated in Long Island City. The applicant team is now actively searching for another local nonprofit or arts organization to occupy this community facility space. Next slide. This elevation shows the brick and metal facade of the proposed new development, and the architect will be present at the public hearing on Wednesday and will be able to respond to Commissioner Burney's previous comments about the facade treatment and the building's architectural design. Next slide. In order to facilitate the proposed new development, the applicants are requesting a zoning map change from the existing C44A zoning district to a C44D zoning district. C44A districts have an R7A residential equivalent, and the proposed C44D district has an R8A residential equivalent. Next slide. The applicants also propose a zoning text amendment to Appendix F for the creation of a mandatory affordable housing Area 10. The applicant proposes mapping both options 1 and 2 pursuant to the MIH program, but intends to develop the project pursuant to option 1. Option 1 would provide affordable housing at an average of 60% AMI. Next slide. This project was certified on December 14th, and on January 19th, 2021, CB1 held a public hearing via Zoom on this application and voted to approve the application by a vote of 19 in favor, 11 opposed, and with 3 abstentions. On February 4th, 2021, the Queensborough president held a public hearing on this application and voted to approve the application with the following 2 conditions. The first condition of a goal of 30% for local hiring and use of MWBE businesses. And the second, that the applicant should contact the New York City Department of Parks to discuss their commitment to maintenance and potential improvements for Athens Square Park. In summary, the proposed zoning map amendment from a C44A to a C44D zoning district and the establishment of an MIH area would facilitate the construction of 104 new residential units with 26 permanently affordable units, ground floor retail and community facility uses at 3002 Newtown Avenue. The applicant is planning to make a 10-minute team presentation at this week's public hearing and will be available to address additional questions and concerns at that time. Before I conclude my presentation and open it up to questions, I'd like to turn the mic over to Deputy Director of the Queen's Office, Alexis Wheeler. Next slide, please. Alexis.
Thank you so much, Joy. And Jeff, if we could please advance this slide once more. Thank you. Good afternoon, commissioners. I wanted to take a few moments to address the question raised by Commissioner Levin at certification regarding the proposed 3002 Newtown rezoning within the bounds of the 2010 Astoria rezoning. So just to step back for a moment, the goals of the Astoria rezoning were to protect neighborhood character from out-of-scale development, more closely reflect established development patterns, direct opportunities for moderate residential and commercial growth to locations along wide streets and transit resources, and finally provide incentives for the production of affordable housing. The map that we're showing here is a portion of the overall rezoning boundary in yellow from the 2010 rezoning, and the 3 areas mapped with voluntary inclusionary housing are outlined in red. The blue dots represent the developments that we have seen in these areas since the adoption of the zoning, and the lighter blue dots are the developments that opted to utilize the voluntary inclusionary housing provisions. So since adoption, we've seen 17 developments progress within those geographies, but unfortunately only 3 of them have developed pursuant to our VIH provisions. So this has resulted in the production of over 700 market rate units, but we really only have 45 units of affordable housing in those light blue developments. So suffice to say, we haven't been able to observe the goal of affordable housing really being met from the 2010 rezoning in a manner that is keeping pace with the city's housing goals and our affordability needs. But we do feel that locations such as this transit-rich site are appropriate for additional density and are great opportunities for us to be able to map MIH to increase the affordable housing stock in this very robust area of the market. And so with that, thank you so much, commissioners, and Joy and myself are open for any questions.
Questions from the commission? Commissioner Levin.
Not a question, but just thanks to Alexis for those maps. That that paints a pretty stark picture of how the voluntary program has worked, and we're now far enough along to have a it's not just a snapshot, but it's over a stretch of time. So part of me wonders, well, it's sort of too bad we upzoned it then, because now we wouldn't have to take it up another notch. But anyway, thank you for putting that together. It goes a long way to answering my question.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Other questions?
Oh, I guess, and could I just ask, the community board didn't give us too much elaboration on their vote, which was like really split. Is there anything more you can tell us about how the hearing went and what the issues were that divided the community? I think one of them is the scale, right?
Yeah, so at the community board public hearing, there were several members from the public that joined and voiced their concerns, but it was the first time the community board was really hearing from these folks from the community. And some of those concerns were, as you mentioned, the scale of it, and a lot of the people who testified opposing it were also concerned that the rents would go up as a result. And they said there were not enough affordable units being provided. But those were some of the issues that were raised.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joy. We will see this at the public hearing on Wednesday.
Okay, the fourth item on the agenda is a pre-hearing review of a Udac designation and disposition of city-owned property in the Bronx, Community District 4. Our presenter is Fernando Ortiz.
Good afternoon. My name is Fernando Ortiz, and I'm here to present on 97 West 169th Street, formerly known as the Corporal Fisher site. Next slide, please. So the applicant for this proposal is the New York City Department of Housing Preservation and Development, HPD. The location is 97 West 169th Street, which is made up of 2 lots. It is located in the High Bridge neighborhood in Community District 4. And the actions requested are designation of a UDAP, approval of the project as a UDAP, and disposition of city-owned land. Next slide, please. As mentioned, the project is located in Community Board 4, which is the hybrid community. It is adjacent to Corporal Irwin Fisher Park, and the site itself was formerly mapped as parkland and sat vacant for over a decade. It is within a 5 to 10 minute walk to the subway line, both the 4 and the D at 170th Street. And it is also serviced by the BX35 along Edward L. Grant Highway, which is just a block north, and by the BX 11 and 13 along Plimpton Avenue, which is just 2 blocks east. It is also south of the Cross Bronx Expressway and west of the Major Deegan Expressway, both major highways providing access to the George Washington Bridge and beyond. Next slide, please. As mentioned, the site shown here in red, outlined in red, is made up of 2 tax lots that are currently vacant with approximately 15,000 square footage of total lot area. The project site has about 150 feet of frontage on West 169th Street. The project area is owned by the City of New York and is located on the northern side of West 169th Street, which is a narrow street between Nelson and Shakespeare Avenue. Next slide, please. Currently, the site is within an R71 zoning district. Most of this area is residential with some community facilities nearby, and all commercial uses are concentrated along the corridors of Edward L. Grant Highway, which is just a block or two north, and Jerome Avenue, which is just a block, 2 blocks east. During the Jerome Avenue rezoning from 2018, this was a site identified by the community for potential redevelopment to address the need for more affordable housing for seniors. Next slide, please. The proposal for this site is a 9-story affordable housing that will have a total of 95 feet in height and a setback of 15 feet, a ground level floor to ceiling height of 15 feet and 9.5 feet every other floor. The proposed development will be a new residential building and will contain 104 dwelling units for seniors plus 1 superintendent unit, and we'll have a community facility space, and we'll have a designated community facility space on the ground level to be occupied by a federally qualified health center on the ground level. Next slide, please. The developer for this site is Wishfish, which is a nonprofit developer for senior housing and a service provider. The proposed project will have sustainability features, which includes green walls with native plantings, solar panel, energy efficient windows and lighting, gray water collection on site, and will have what they're calling kind of a proposed indoor-outdoor space where seniors can sit in the lobby and view out into the street, which is kind of increasing the concept of more eyes on the street. And the applicant intends to, the unit breakdown for this proposal, as mentioned, will be 104 dwelling units, 45 of which will be studios, 59 which will be 1-bedroom apartments, a 1-2-bedroom apartment. 30% of these units will be for formerly homeless, and there will be 22 enhanced studios on the upper 2 levels of the project. Next slide, please. In summary, the proposal will be a 9-story affordable senior housing with a community facility space on the ground level, which will be occupied by a healthcare center. The actions requested are a UDAC designation, UDAP approval, and disposition of city-owned property. And next slide, please. This project went through Community Board 4, and the recommendation was 38 in favor, 0 opposed, with an outcome of conditionally favorable, and it was currently approved by the Borough President. Thank you.
Chair Lago, you're muted. I don't know if you. No, you're not able to speak. Okay. Vice Chair, if you want, I believe that Commissioner Levin had her hand up first.
Yeah,
Please.
just ask what was conditional about the community board's approval.
So I have, yes, I have reached out to the community board, which is Community Board 4, because they had no votes opposing or no absentee. So, but they have not given me any further.
Right, and they just checked the box and didn't
That is correct.
articulate what the conditions are. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Further questions for Mr. Ortiz?
Commissioner Marin has his hand up.
Commissioner,
He had his hand up, but
other questions?
okay.
Is this a certification?
No, this is a for
A
pre-hearing.
pre-hearing?
I'm back.
Oh, there we go.
All right.
I'm back,
sorry.
yeah. So good afternoon and thank you. Sorry about that. Fernando, welcome to the team. I just have 2 basic questions, one of which was already posited by Anna, which was the reluctancy of the community board to provide a response. And then the second one was, can you go over your unit breakdown and your AMIs again? And can you please define for me what you mean by an enhanced studio?
Yeah, so the unit breakdown will be 104 dwelling units, 45 which will be designated as studios, 59 which will be 1-bedroom apartments. There will be 1 2-bedroom apartments, There will be 32 units for formerly homeless and 22 enhanced care studios. By enhanced care studios, which will be the upper two floors of this proposal, they will kind of be more of a communal space living where there will be common kitchen areas and common living rooms for the studios. So I believe that those studios may not have kitchens in there in those apartments, but it will be kind of more of a communal living space on the upper two floors, if I believe.
So is this a pilot program, or is this something that Wishfish has done before in other projects?
I'm not 100% sure if this is something that Wishfish has done in other projects, but they are a senior and service provider, so it might be something that they've done, but I can verify that information.
All right. So if we can actually get some floor plans so we can understand what that looks like, that would be helpful. And then of course the experience of Wishfish in developing these types and of course providing supportive services for these spaces would be appreciated.
So Commissioner, we'll get the floor plans. I think that's, you know, we'll ask those, and then Wishfish and HPD and others will be on Wednesday, and we'll make sure that they are ready to answer these questions.
Wonderful, thank you.
In the presentation, there is a floor plan. I'm not sure if it's a floor plan for enhanced level floors. I'm sorry, the enhanced care studio floors, but there is a floor plan in the presentation.
Yeah, let's check for the upper floors.
Yeah, I'll take a look at it again. I don't believe it did, but I'll take a look at it.
And thank you. I apologize. My microphone went kerplooey for a few minutes. And thank you for stepping in, both Vice Chair and Ryan. And not seeing any other raised hands, we will see this at our public hearing on Wednesday.
All right, moving on, the fifth item on the agenda is also a pre-hearing review of a zoning map and zoning text amendment in the Bronx Community District 9, and our presenter is Manny Lagares.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, there we go.
Okay. Good afternoon, Commissioners. This is the 909 Castle Hill Avenue rezoning. Next slide, please. The applicant is 510 East Realty, Inc., and they're requesting a zoning map amendment from R32 to R6BC13 and R6B, and a zoning text amendment to Appendix F of the zoning resolution designating the rezoning area as an MIH area. There have been no recent land use actions in this area. Next slide, please. The project area is located 2 blocks south of the Bruckner Expressway on a block bounded by Quimby Avenue to the north, Castle Hill Avenue to the east, Story Avenue to the south, and Olmsted Avenue forms the western boundary. The project area is outlined in blue, and the development site is outlined in red. Starting with the development site, it contains a 2-story residential building, and just north of that is a row of 5 3-story residential buildings with ground floor commercial. The surrounding area is basically 1 and 2 families, 1 and 2-story, 1 and 2 family homes with scattered pockets of 3-story buildings. The transportation is good in this area. The Bronx 5 and 22 bus lines travel along Castle Hill Avenue, as well as the Bronx Manhattan 8 Express bus. In addition to that, the subway station, Castle Hill train station, is approximately 0.7 miles away from the project area. Next slide, please. The area map here, the land use, as you can see, is predominantly low density. And if you look at the project area, which is surrounded by the dotted black outline, the 5-story buildings that are within the project area, they're commercial. There are also other commercial uses across from Quimby Avenue, also 3-story buildings. Next slide, please. These images, we're looking northwest at the project area development site. And as you can see, the lower photograph just shows you the 3 stories, 5 3-story buildings with the ground floor commercial. The ground floor, they are non-conforming in terms of this commercial use, and also in terms of the FAR. They're show non-compliant. Next slide, please. The applicant is proposing a 5-story mixed-use building with 35 dwelling units. As you can see on at the screen, you can see 2 ground floor commercial uses are fronting on Castle Hill Avenue. And along Story Avenue, you have the residential lobby. Left of that, you have a tenant meeting space. And to the left of that, a community facility space. And going even further to the left, you have the entrance to the parking area. Next slide, please. This is your existing and proposed zoning, the R32 low density with a 0.5 FAR, and the R6B 2.2 with the MIH. You also see the establishment of the commercial overlay, which will make the non-conformance make these buildings conforming. The MIH option that the applicant selected was option number 1, and as a result of that, there will be 9 permanently affordable dwelling units. Next slide, please. This is a rendering of what the building would look like. It's a 5-story building, approximately 41,000 square feet in total floor area. Of that, approximately 35,000 square feet are residential, and the remainder, which is approximately 6,000 square feet, would be for the commercial and community facility uses. Next slide, please. The community board unanimously approved of the application by a vote of 24-0-0 with conditions. The conditions that were imposed by the board requested that the applicant make investments in the community, its parks, schools, and also to sponsor youth committees, as well as to create opportunities for minority-owned contractors and also a union workforce. In addition to that, they asked the applicant to replace the commercial space that I showed you along Story Avenue with a community space for a nonprofit organization. The applicant has agreed to all of these conditions. The Bronx Borough President approved the application. Before I take any questions, I just want to mention that at the review session of the December 14th, when this was certified, the commissioners had some questions. Commissioner De La Hoz asked if the rooftop recreation area was energy efficient, and the answer is yes. The applicant will be providing solar panels. Commissioner Marin had asked if any of the parking spaces, the 22 parking spaces, if they would be available to the commercial tenants. The answer is no, just be for the residential tenants. And in addition to that, Commissioner Marin requested street level elevations to show what the pedestrian experience would be like in this area. The applicant did provide this information. However, they did not show much of the experience that you will get. And what I've done is that I contacted the applicant and informed them that I would need it for today or the public hearing. And they said that they'll be able to provide this information post the public hearing. Are there any questions?
Thank you, Manny.
You're welcome.
Questions from the commission? Commissioner Levin.
Manny, is there a tenant selected for the community facility space?
Let me see on this one. I'm going to have to get back to you on that. I can ask the applicant.
Okay, well, yeah, I assume the applicant
Sure.
must be listening in. If they, I hope they can include in their presentation on Wednesday some information
Okay.
about the proposed tenant for the community facility space.
Yes, you're very welcome.
Other questions? Okay, we will see this at the public hearing on Wednesday.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Manny. The sixth item on our agenda is a pre-hearing review of a zoning map amendment and modification of a restrictive declaration in Brooklyn Community District 13. Our presenter is Colin Lane.
Good afternoon, and this is 606 Neptune Avenue, rezoning, returning for pre-hearing. Next slide. And this is an application by McDonald's Corporation to request a zoning map amendment from an R6 C12 zoning district to an R6 C24 overlay within the Special Ocean Parkway District, and a modification to the restrictive declaration to facilitate the legalization of an accessory drive-through facility in an existing eating and drinking establishment at 606 Neptune Avenue. Next slide. The project area is located within the West Brighton neighborhood of Brooklyn and Community District 13. Next slide. The development site is located 150 feet west of West 6th Street in between Neptune Avenue to the north and Sheepshead Bay Road to the south. The surrounding area is well served by public transportation. 400 feet to the north is the Neptune Avenue F subway station, and the B68 and B36 buses are along Neptune Avenue. Next slide. The development site is a use group 6 eating and drinking establishment, McDonald's, with an accessory drive-through facility, 36 parking spaces, and an indoor and outdoor dining areas. The McDonald's on the development site opened in the mid-1970s, and the accessory drive-through has been on the site since 1982. Next slide. The area map here displays a mix of land uses such as residential, commercial, parking facilities, and transportation and utility. The development site is in a R6 C12 zoning district within the Special Ocean Parkway District. And this area is also within the 1% chance flood zone. Next slide. Use group 6 eating and drinking establishments with accessory drive-through facilities as of right are allowed as of right in most commercial districts, with the exception of C1 and C5 districts. Pursuant to 73243 of the zoning resolution, the Board of Standard Appeals may permit a special permit for an eating and drinking places to operate their accessory drive-through facilities within C11, C12, and C13 districts, except in special purpose districts. The accessory drive-through facility existing on the development site today is not eligible for a BSA special permit and cannot operate as of right within the existing C12 commercial overlay. Next slide. And as you can see on this slide, there has been a long history at this site, and the applicants need a rezoning that will allow the accessory drive-through to be as of right. Next slide. And here are some photos. On the left is a view west along West 6th Street of the McDonald's and the outdoor seating area. And on the right is a view south at the intersection of Neptune and West 6th Street. Next slide. On the left is a view north at the Sheepshead Bay end of the McDonald's parking lot and drive-through. And on the right is a view of the McDonald's drive-through from the sidewalk of West 6th Street. Next slide. And to facilitate the use of the accessory drive-through facility, the applicants are requesting a zoning map amendment to rezone the project area with a C24 commercial overlay. This rezoning will allow the legalization of the accessory drive-through to the McDonald's. Next slide. And additionally, to amend the restrictive declaration with the 2002 changes to the site plan would require a minor modification and CPC approval. Next slide. A public hearing was held on December 21st, 2020 at Brooklyn Community Board 13, and a vote on January 27th. The board approved the application with a vote of 33 in favor. Next slide. The Brooklyn Borough President held a public hearing on January 25th and approved the application. The Brooklyn Borough President expressed concerns regarding unemployed Brooklyn residents and opportunities for job creation. He believes the owner or the manager of this McDonald's should engage with the community board, local elected officials, and workforce development organizations to maximize local hiring. Next slide. And in order to facilitate the drive-through and amend the restrictive declaration, the applicant is requesting to rezone and modify the declaration. Thank you.
Thank you, Colin. And questions from the commission? Okay, then we will see this at the public hearing on Wednesday.
Thank you.
The seventh item on the agenda is a city council modification scope determination for the zoning map and zoning text amendment for 9114 Fifth Avenue rezoning. Our presenter is Josh Vogel.
And actually, before Josh begins, if I might just note that this is an example of very healthy engagement that the department was able to have with both the council member and with the city council land use review staff. And I want to know how appreciative we are of the ability to work with them and reach an approach that we think meets a whole array of concerns and puts us in a good place. Over to you, Josh.
Thank you, Chair Lago. Good afternoon, commissioners. This is a scope determination for a modification by the City Council of a previously approved application for a zoning map amendment to change a C82 district to an R7A C24 district, and the zoning text amendment to map MIH in the Bay Ridge neighborhood of Brooklyn, Community Board 10. It was approved by the CPC on February 3rd, 2021, and on February 24th, the City Council voted to approve the proposed actions with modifications. Next slide, please. The proposed districts of the zoning map amendment were modified as shown here. On the left is a map of the original boundary approved by the CPC outlined in the orange dotted line, which would have mapped the entire project area with an R7A C24 district. And the map on the right shows the modified district in green, which changes 3 mid-block lots, lots 32, 33, and 34 on 92nd Street to an R6A C24 district. The City Council shared their rationale for the modification, stating that the mid-block R6A district is more moderate and maintains existing scale and character in line with the goals of the Special Bay Ridge District. And to provide some background, the original recommendations from the Community Board 10 and the Borough President included removing these lots entirely from the proposed district. These 3 lots are currently residential buildings in a district that does not allow residential and therefore are non-conforming. They're also a block and a half from the subway and surrounded by higher densities. The department believed it was appropriate to rezone these lots to residential to allow them to be conforming, and had a productive discussion with the council member and community board district manager, sharing the commission's rationale and pointing out that Community Board 10 was last in the city for housing production over the past decade. Following this conversation, the City Council proposed this modification to R6A, to which the department is pleased. Next slide, please. The City Council also modified the proposed text amendment to Appendix F of the zoning resolution by adding the workforce option to the proposed mandatory inclusionary housing area, which is coterminous with the modified rezoning boundary. Next slide, please. The agency has determined that these modifications are within scope and raise no land use or environmental issues requiring further review. Thank you. That concludes my presentation.
And now I'll turn it over to the commissioners for any questions. Okay, then I will ask for a assent to send the scope determination letter to the council, and all those in favor, please say yay.
Yay. Yay.
And opposed? Okay, we'll send the letter.
All right, thanks, Josh. The 8th item on the agenda is a City Council modification scope determination for the zoning text amendment associated with 1620 Cortelyou Road rezoning. The council proposed to eliminate option 2, retaining only MIH option 1. So they modified the MIH options. City planning staff believes that this modification is within scope.
And again, I'll ask for assent to send such a letter to the council. Those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, thank you.
The 9th item on the agenda is a city council modification scope determination for the zoning text associated with the 42-11 9th Street IBIA. And Scott Solomon is here to discuss.
Actually, Brian, it's
It's
myself.
Alexis. Okay, I thought it might be. Okay.
Thank you so much, and good afternoon again, commissioners. So I will be taking us through the council modification and scope determination for the 4211 9th Street special permit, which is the IBIA 2 that's being created in Queens. Next slide, please. And so just a past overview of the project. This is a proposal in Council District 2, Community District 2 in Western Queens and Long Island City. And this is, the actions are a special permit pursuant to 7496, the Industrial Business Incentive Areas, and zoning text amendments. And this was approved by the CPC on January 6th. Next slide, please. And so this is a modification that is really to the original text. The original text was kind of relieving the Queens IBA 2 of some of the reporting requirements due to some questions surrounding the availability of appropriate parties within this particular context. So the council has proposed the following modifications that bring the Queens IBIA reporting back into the text, but also essentially broadens the universe of qualified reporting parties. And so this now allows for the use of a special inspection agency as designed or as defined by the administrative code, which is an individual or company selected by the applicant that is qualified by training at a DOB approved training school and subject to New York State licensure requirements, and is also registered with DOB to conduct such inspections. So the owner could still utilize qualifying parties that exist under the current IBIA text, but this again sort of expands the eligibility and maintains city oversight, but here it occurs within DOB. But otherwise, we would see the third-party reporting requirements for the IBIA 1 in Brooklyn remain unchanged. And then finally, there is some just text changes to help make this kind of fold into the existing text in a clean way. Department staff is comfortable with this modification and views it as within scope. Next slide, please. And this is just to show you how it's being incorporated into the text. So there is the removal of the language that initially excludes the IBIA 2 area from the reporting requirement. Next slide, please. And this highlighted shows you how this new additional text fits in for the IBIA 2 area. Next slide, please. And this one, I'm sorry, it's actually not highlighted, but it's literally just the cleanup of a little bit of text to again allow for it to all come together. And so that's all that I have for this modification, and I'm open for any questions.
Thanks, Alexis. Vice Chair Knuckles.
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify, the purpose of these inspections essentially is to ensure that the tenancies are consistent with the IBIA designated area.
That is correct. So areas that call themselves industrial and are part of the required floor area before you're able to utilize the bonus floor area, those are the spaces that are subject to the inspection and reporting. That's exactly what it's in place for.
Thank you.
Okay, and with that, I will again ask for those in favor of sending a letter to the council saying that this is within scope to say aye.
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 Okay, thank you.
Okay, moving on to future votes. For March 17th, 2021, staff prepared reports for zoning for coastal flood resiliency, the citywide text amendment, the resilient neighborhoods, Old Howard Beach, and resilient neighborhoods, Garrettson Beach, and resilient neighborhoods, Sheepshead Bay, collectively known as Zickfer and Friends.
I just want to note that the report, the main report on Zickfer is very long, but is just an absolutely beautifully clear explanation of both what the proposal does, the comments that were received, and I do want to commend the team that prepared, that was able to describe highly technical matters in a way that was technically accurate, but also easy to read.
And also the staff have prepared reports for 135, 137 Bedford Avenue, the HPD New Penn UDAP, the Sudem Street rezoning, and the Governor's Island rezoning. Also scheduled for a decision on March 17th. I will note that actually that they're appearing on our calendar, 957 Ionia Avenue and 569 Tot Hill Road appear on our calendar, but are going to be laid over. There's some issues we're working through there. And then, but continued to schedule are 852 Carlton Boulevard, 1239 Forest Hill Road, 28 Pleasant Valley Avenue, and 33 Ridgefield Avenue. These are all Staten Island authorizations or certifications. And then 35 Pearsall Street, which, I see a hand up, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, Ryan, that was on 33 Ridgefield Avenue. I see that in our packages we had some pretty effective correspondence from neighbors on that very narrow, skinny street about whether the street could really accommodate these 3 two-family houses. And I guess I would just ask, is Staten Island staff confident that this development can take place without overloading infrastructure and preventing garbage from getting picked up? I mean, you'd look at the thing on Street View and you can understand why the neighbors explain that very frequently they don't even get garbage picked up because the garbage trucks can't get up the street.
My understanding is that they are comfortable with the 3 two-family homes that are proposed. I can message and see if we can get someone from Staten Island office on. I don't believe they're on the call currently, but we can get them. But I discussed this with them and they said, yes, we're comfortable with this. And that, I see someone raise their hand in the attendees. Adam did.
Hi, yes, I'm here.
Excellent.
Yes, we are comfortable from a land use perspective.
Okay. Well, so despite that news, which I'm sure will disappoint the neighbors certainly get props for making an effective presentation, in particular the cartoon that was submitted showing who lives where and how these houses would fit in. So a picture is worth 1,000 words.
I just want to note that it'll also be reviewed by other agencies as well. So those issues will most likely be addressed with some of our sister agencies.
Okay, yeah, sounds like there's some work to do by sister agencies. Thank you.
Thank you, Adam. Moving on, for April 7th, 2021, a decision. Oh, Roselle, sorry. For April 7th, 2021, a decision will be scheduled for the Harriet and Thomas Truesdale House, which is a landmark designation. There was a package in your package over the weekend. Moving on to post-hearing follow-ups, Arthur Avenue Hotel rezoning. Do we have time? Okay. If there are any further questions on that, I think that we'll be doing some follow-up later on that. Okay. 261 Walton Avenue rezoning. I will note that I know for a fact that the department will be working on materials responding to some of the concerns raised. If there are any further comments, we can collect those and address them. And I believe that the same applies to 431 Concord Avenue, noting that Commissioner Rompishar was recused. All right. 6819 Woodhaven Boulevard. I don't believe we had any. Oh, here we go. Commissioner Marin, you have your hand up.
Yes.
Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. I just wanted to know if the developers of Concord Avenue ever followed up with the street level renderings or rear renderings that were requested.
I believe that those are still outstanding, and we've asked for them to be included. So believe that we have one more review session before we need to vote on this. So we'll make sure that we get back to you guys on that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Excuse me, Ryan?
Yes.
The Manhattan office has a presentation on Governor's Island and wanted to know whether or not they should make it at this time.
Ah, they should. Sorry. So yes, let's go back. Then we have we have a vote coming up on March 17th and Governor's Island. So Allison, why don't you go ahead and
thank you, Ryan. Good afternoon, commissioners. So the commission received a letter from the Department of City Planning on Friday describing 3 areas in the proposed Governor's Island zoning text amendment that the department advises the commission address and modify. The first 2 modifications are in response to the revised zoning text amendment filed by the Trust for Governor's Island on February 26th. The Trust made a series of revisions in the text in response to concerns raised throughout the ULURP process. In light of these revisions, the department believes that further modifications to the text is necessary for clarity and consistency in the proposed text amendment. Next slide, please. So first, in response to public comments, the Trust revised the proposed text amendment to provide for an additional public space adjacent to the Eastern Esplanade within the Eastern sub-area. This revision effectively increases the width of the Eastern Esplanade from 55 to 70 feet, matching the width of the Western Esplanade, which is seen here in the green line. On the eastern side, we can see that the green line crosses into the allotted parcel area within the Eastern sub-area. And in the next slide, please. We see a zoomed in view of this, so we can more closely see the extension of the additional public area adjacent to the Eastern Esplanade within the parcel boundary. So in evaluating the revision made by the Trust, it became apparent that bulk controls along the Eastern Esplanade required further adjustment for clarity, as many of the bulk provisions reference the boundary line between the Eastern sub-area and the Eastern Esplanade. These adjustments are necessary to ensure no development is permitted in the expanded Esplanade area, which is seen in the darker blue on this diagram. So the department advises the commission clarify that this additional public space shall be considered part of the Esplanade for purposes of applying the relevant bulk controls. Next slide, please. Secondly, the proposed text specifies that in instances where portions of buildings with differing base heights intersect, the higher minimum base height is permitted to wrap the corner for a distance of 125 feet from that intersection. And we can see this provision on the diagram on the left-hand side. In the revised text filed by the Trust for Governor's Island, the permitted base heights were reduced across the entirety of the island. Minimum required base heights previously varied greatly from 50 to 90 feet. And in the revised proposed text, these base heights vary minimally from 50 to 60 feet. So the department feels that it is no longer necessary to allow the higher base heights to wrap around a corner and apply to intersecting building frontages, as almost all base heights are now consistent. And we see this on the diagram on the right-hand side. And so therefore, the department recommends the commission modify the text accordingly. Next slide, please. And then finally, as we discussed at the last post-hearing follow-up session, the department advises the reduction of parking spaces. Throughout the ULURP process, both the community and the commission has raised concerns about the amount of parking provided in the South Island as inappropriate given the pedestrian nature of the island. The department's suggestion is that the commission reduce parking from 300 spaces to 200 spaces. The department feels that this reduction is reasonable while still being able to support the trust operation and future tenant needs. As a reminder, the vote for this project is scheduled for Wednesday, March 17th. And I am joined today by Eric Boxford, Deputy Director of the Manhattan office, if there are any further questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Allison. And just to clarify that the applicant, Governor of the Trust, had itself already submitted an amended application. These are further changes that we recommend that the commission make to the application.
Correct. Thank you.
Thanks, Allison.
Okay. Thank you for getting me back on track there, Edwin. I believe I last said on the post-hearing follow-up, 6819 Woodhaven Boulevard. I don't believe there's any further on that. If there's any questions you want us to take back to the applicant or the borough offices, raise your hand. Okay. 300 Huntington Street rezoning. Jonathan Keller is here to discuss.
Okay. Good afternoon, commissioners. Of course, right before it was my turn, my Wi-Fi went down and I restarted. So fun times. At the public hearing for 300 Huntington, we heard from the applicant team regarding the challenges of developing the site and the vision of the building and waterfront open space. We heard too from the applicant team in response to the BP's recommendation that they would be happy to provide a ladder along the shoreline. We also heard at the public hearing from a number of local and regional recreational boating enthusiasts and their desire to change the proposed waterfront street end design to include boating access. The applicant team submitted a letter to the commission that you should all have received in your package. But just to summarize a little bit of that letter, it outlines the history of the project, that zoning does not require the street end improvements, that despite the assertions during the public hearing, the site is not currently suited for boat access, that the team has worked closely with multiple agencies and took key goals from the Gowanus Lowlands Master Plan and the Gowanus Waterfront Access Plan into their design, and that the site is really better suited for the design proposed than for boat access. And we and others have noted that there are, the broader planning context in and around the canal without going into specific detail. And so while this is a private application, this broader view and context is relevant and important. So we've pulled together a few slides that we hope will inform and support the commission's considerations. Next slide. So first, the community has been asking questions and planning for a future with housing, jobs, open space, and infrastructure since at least the 1960s. And after decades of starts and stops, DCP and the community set out on a neighborhood planning process to get from, we have these challenges before us, to what do we want the future to be like and how can we shape it? And when we launched in October of 2016, the Gowanus neighborhood planning process, we asked the community about how to approach studying Gowanus. And what resulted was a 4+ year process that accomplished many things. But two big and relevant ones are the Gowanus framework, and it also made space for a diverse, disparate voices to be heard, and for people to talk to each other, and for many parallel planning efforts to take place. Next slide. The multi-year inclusive and expansive outreach led to a planning and land use framework that was released in June of 2018. The Gowanus framework is a comprehensive framework of goals and strategies, and it includes recommended land use changes to be implemented as part of an overall Gowanus neighborhood plan. Next slide. And also the Lowlands Master Planning process organized and advocated around the neighborhood planning process and the Gowanus WAP. Here you can see the lowlands typologies and recommendations. Seen here are a spectrum of potential shoreline and design outcomes that could be taken on by a particular developer or site, depending on the location, suitability, the proposed building design, and uses. Next slide. And the lowlands work also highlighted street ends as key places for stormwater retention. In wet weather events, stormwater makes its way to our sewers and water bodies in general through two ways: through buildings that capture it and direct it to the sewer system, and our streets, which essentially become conveyors to the sewers or directly into the water. This is one of the reasons why environmental groups like the Gowanus Canal Conservancy have advocated for more performative features and components in street and designs, as they advocate overall for reducing CSOs, et cetera, into the canal. Next slide. So it's in this context that we've been working on the proposed Gowanus Waterfront Access Plan that was shared publicly in January of this year on our website. Next slide. Some of the guiding principles that shape the Waterfront Access Plan include adapting waterfront zoning to better suit the canal and promoting a variety of design outcomes, ensuring sufficient zoning and design flexibility to address site planning challenges in flood zones, incentivizing strategies that could provide longer-term benefits, and particularly following the cleanup of the canal, and planning for sea level rise adaptation. Next slide. The vision for the future of the canal is to promote a wide variety of design features, from programmed public spaces, community amenities, and active edges to passive open spaces, offering respite and natural shoreline edges. This spectrum of examples summarizes what we've heard during the outreach process. The proposed zoning is intended to be flexible enough to facilitate different permutations of these potential outcomes and would support excellence in landscape design. Next slide. And the WAP regulations are intended to work across different scales, including at the canal scale that aims to ensure a cohesive public realm experience, to parcel-specific requirements that respond to specific locations and unique conditions, and site scale provisions focused on providing site planning and design flexibility. Next slide. The Waterfront Access Plan would establish locations for public access elements such as shore public walkways. Shore public walkways typically are 40 feet in width and would be required along the water's edge to form a continuous esplanade. For certain constrained parcels, shore public walkways with a width of 30 feet would be required. The 30-foot width would apply only to shallow or irregularly shaped sites, as well as sites with 2 shoreline frontages. Next slide. Over half of the parcels along the canal would trigger a supplemental public access area, or SPAA, requirement. SPAAs would be required to be located adjacent to street ends or as widened portions of the shore public walkway. The option to place SPAAs closer to street ends would provide opportunities to enhance entrances to sites, whereas the widened shore public walkway option would be allowed for expanded esplanade condition. I would note 300 Huntington site, given its size, does not trigger an SPAA. I've also noted on this map here, the locations of the existing boat launch at the end of 2nd Street and the 300 Huntington Street project site. Both are on the west side of the canal, and they are about 3,800 feet apart, or 0.7 miles away, using the street grid from Huntington Street, Smith Street, 3rd Street, Bond Street, 2nd Street. But using the future esplanade, they're approximately 2,200 feet apart, and that would be going up what you can see in green, in either going up Bond Street or going up the visual corridor to 3rd Street as well. As the crow flies, they are approximately 1,800 feet away from each other. Next slide. At the parcel and site level, provisions in the WAP typically fall under one or more of the objectives noted here to encourage a variety, activation, and quality design, incentivize community amenities, and promote resiliency and sustainability. So we've pulled out a few relevant provisions here related to the current discussion. Hopefully soon we can present all of the provisions, but we just pulled a few of the slides for now. Next slide. Through our precedent research, we learned that there is a need to right-size the minimum planting requirements, particularly for added flexibility to accommodate different design features and programming. A lower planting requirement provides the ability to more easily mitigate grading challenges for sites in flood zones that may include bi-level esplanades and ramped pathways for accessibility. The WAP would lower the baseline planting requirement if designs accommodate certain amenities such as play areas, boat launches, water features, and dog runs. These are all priorities and goals we've heard from the community, and not all of them can be accommodated on one site. But from the overall canal viewpoint, we hope to see these across different sites. Next slide. To the noted goal of performative designs, the WAP would expand the definition of what qualifies as required planting to include intertidal planting in order to promote softer shorelines and water tolerant species. The WAP would establish dimensional requirements and other parameters as well to facilitate optimal growing conditions. Next slide. The WAP would also modify the minimum width and location requirements for screening buffers to promote greater interaction between ground floors of buildings with active uses and public access areas. A reduced buffer width would also allow for a broader range of flexible public access area design layouts and configurations. Next slide. And lastly, in order to ensure continuity of public access across waterfront sites, the WAP would require street ends adjacent to waterfront public access areas to be improved as upland access, connecting to adjacent shore public walkways and public sidewalks. The WAP would include requirements for circulation paths, planting, and seating. And next slide, I'll go through I think a handful of existing condition picks that we took over the last weekend. This is currently the street and the street end in the back. It's currently closed off. Next slide. Here's a view peeking through the fence. To the right is 300 Huntington. To the left is 459 Smith Street within the proposed Gowanus rezoning area. Next slide. This is a view across the canal looking west at the 300 Huntington site and the MTA lot to the left. Next slide. And this is the current view of the street end, or rather tugboats obscuring the view of the street end. And you can see, if you can see through them, you can see the rock scramble at the shoreline. Next slide. And here are a couple of slides that I took on a site visit with my son 2 weeks prior to the lockdown last March in 2020. Next slide. Here's a closer up view of the claimed access at the street end next to the recently improved bulkhead on 300 Huntington site. And yes, I was holding my son's hand here with a bit of unease in my stomach. And, you know, of course, he's 5 years old, so he loved it and wanted to get closer. Next slide. And that's the presentation. I'll take any questions you have.
If I could just note in a nutshell, I think many, if not all of us, were struck by the ardor, the efficacy of the presentation by the kayakers. It caused us to go back and kick the tires again, look at the waterfront access plan, which, as Jonathan explained, calls for the waterfront access plan calls for meeting a number of different and competing interests, and not all on each site. Like a number of us, without knowing it, Jonathan and I were both at the site yesterday taking advantage of the spring-like weather. And certainly any current access for kayaking is certainly, to my mind, dangerous. It requires breaking through a construction fence and getting down to the water in quite substandard conditions. And so that is why we thought to, one, show the waterfront access plan. I do want to emphasize that this is a document that was already publicly released. So it is not part of any certification of the Gowanus plan. And Commissioner Levin, I see that you have your hand up.
Yes, I just wanted to thank Jonathan for all that detail, particularly the more expansive view of the work that has led to the broader waterfront access plan. So I hope that that is a preview of a soon to be certified application. Very good to get a sneak peek. Yeah, I also was really struck by the testimony that we heard and got curious, and because the weather was great, got on my bike and rode over there the weekend before last. And you know, seeing the site makes all the difference. The lowlands plan does lay out aspirations for public access on the MTA site to the south, just underneath the the elevated subway station, and that looked like it would be a great thing if it could ever happen, but who knows if, I mean, there's a lot of parties to negotiate to make that happen. I do think that the testimony we heard, particularly from the educators, but also from the kayakers, about the importance of some form of waterfront access in the lower end of the canal was really powerful. And there is an equity component here. And having seen the end of Huntington Street, I'm satisfied that Huntington Street isn't the right place for it. But I really hope that future planning can include, active access further down at that location. I do have a technical question. Is Huntington Street, the street end there, is that a mapped city street?
Yes, it is a map city street. The ownership is unclear. But we did in 2019, the law department issued a CCO, which allows basically the city to say, we don't know who the owner is, but we've been basically acting as the owner. We've been providing services and parking. And so we have the jurisdiction to allow for people to construct and design the street end. Okay, so it is publicly, it is mapped.
Okay, so Monadnock will be required to build out that street end, but it will.
That's right. So zoning does not require them to. What they are required to do is the builder's pavement plan. And that is just basically the turnaround plus 5 feet into the neighboring side. In good faith, and partly because they've been in the neighborhood since the 70s, they wanted additional flexibility for their building, but also because they want to be part of the neighborhood and part of the changing esplanade and the canal. That they decided to enter into the waterfront zoning and trigger it, and then also to design the street in which they wouldn't be required to do. So this is them going above and beyond, and they would be constructing it, and through the restrictive deck, there would be aspects of that they would have to maintain. So otherwise, if they were not to, then it would be on the hook for the city to do this.
Right, got it. Okay.
And to your earlier point about the school and the Harbor School, I think there is some follow-up we can also do. And I know after the hearing, I spoke to some folks in the community. I think the Harbor School and what their needs are actually would be well provided for at the shoreline, since I think their testimony was about sampling. And as the shore public walkway gets directly to the edge, it's probably a safer place for kids to actually be able to get samples into the water than in the rock scramble. So I think some of this is just education that we can do during the overall process that we hope to commence in the coming weeks, hopefully, if we can.
Okay, maybe the Esplanade gets built in time for your son to be big enough to be doing the sampling himself.
Yes, yeah, maybe.
Although not accidentally. Right? Yeah. Thanks a lot.
The other thing that I'll note, it's a shame that Jonathan didn't include a picture of his son playing in the renovated St. Mary's Park. It's an absolutely brilliant park renovation that runs underneath the elevated subway line and has become such a hit because of one of the great park equipment, playground equipment, but also the fact that in the summer, it provides beautiful shade for the park.
Yeah.
Bernie.
Actually, years ago now, my daughter had 500 oysters in a net dangling in the canal as part of that Billion Oyster Project to see how they would do. And oddly enough, they ultimately died not due to pollution, but because of predators. They were attacked by other worms and crabs and what have you. So there's life in that pond somehow.
Oh, it is alive, and we will. I'm sure we will hear from the Conservancy and others. We took a tour with the dredgers a while ago, and we saw birds and other animals. It's definitely I forget the quote that is about its demise was. Anyway, I'm forgetting that quote, but the canal is definitely alive, and we'll be getting cleaner and more alive.
Yeah, but Jonathan, I did have one question, and thanks for that terrific presentation. In your overall map of the plan of the waterfront access plan, you show the current boat access at 2nd Street with a big red star. So my question is, when it's all said and done and it's all built out, where will the other boat access points be?
Sure, that's a good point. I wouldn't, if I actually tried to tell you that, I wouldn't trust me because I don't know. I think we'll have to see how development occurs over time and who the first movers are. And I think it's going to be a process of advocacy through the community and the lowlands and the Brooklyn office as the projects come through. And as things do get built, right, who builds first and what they build will have an impact on what else others are thinking about. If somebody is doing tot lots over here, they may not want to do another tot lot. If they do a boat launch in one place, they may not do it right next to it. But I was just going to say one more thing. I think to give you a sense, I do think places that have the shore public, the supplemental public access areas, the areas that are a little bit larger, I think they are best suited towards a boat launch being able to be incorporated along with many other design outcomes. So I'm thinking of 3rd Street potentially on the east side as a good location. And there's a couple other to the north of 300 Huntington has a very large supplemental public access area as well. But we'll have to see as they come through what their design is and what we can also advocate for and push for.
Yeah. Well, you say advocate, and we mandate all sorts of things. You can't mandate a boat access at certain locations?
Sure. I mean, that came up, and our response was, we don't know where the best boat access would be. And we wouldn't say that we actually do know. I think those same dredgers came in and they asked us about making a broad requirement, every certain 100 feet. And our response was that wasn't something that we should be doing. And we actually, as planners, wouldn't know that every 100 feet is correct for the boat launches. So,
well, that seems excessive. Every 100 feet seems over the top.
Yeah.
I understand their point of view, but that's
sure.
maybe going too far.
To that point, if we scale it back, then you're saying, should we pick certain sites to require that? And I think that same logic applies, because I think while they may be bigger, it still may not be the right one. And the first mover may be a smaller site and they want to provide a boat access and they make it work.
Yeah.
So then we would have a requirement somewhere else that it may not make sense.
Yeah. But there's some logic, obviously, in having boat access at appropriate distances, so they're not every 100 feet, but whatever. And it seems to me that if you don't have that built into the plan, there's a danger that just none of them will happen, and the dredgers' worst fears will be realized.
That is certainly something that they have raised to us, and I'm sure as we get into the Gowanus ULURP, that'll be another comment that we take on.
So there's still an opportunity out there.
Yeah, I'm sure we will hear more. I'm sure that, as you saw, they are well organized, they're great folk, and we'll hear about that in their proposal. So,
okay, thank you.
But for the litigation, we would be in the midst of the ULURP for the Gowanus rezoning. Yeah. Discussions can occur.
Yeah. How's that going, by the way? Is it resolved yet?
Yeah, we're stayed. And that's why we are so consciously emphasizing that what Jonathan presented today was a waterfront access plan that had been previously released. We did not discuss the rezoning because we're precluded from doing so. Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on to the Acme Smoked Fish Gem Street rezoning. Alexandra Patti-Diaz is here with a presentation.
Good afternoon, commissioners. It's very good to see you again. At our last session, you raised concerns about the design of the building and the borough, and some questions regarding the borough president's recommendations. Today, we would like to walk you through the design progression of the project, why we believe it is a successful massing and site plan, and some important observations and response to the Brooklyn Borough President recommendation. Next. This project is driven by Agnes' desire to stay in Brooklyn, meaning to build a new facility before the old one is demolished in the same block, and giving the practicality of moving out and the city, ACME asked the Brooklyn office for guidance on design and process of how to ensure a phase plan within the same block that achieve their objectives, since ACME wants to stay in Brooklyn and maintain their operations in the city. Next. Just to recap, this project is looking to, in a first phase, facilitate a new modern facility for ACME, and in a second phase, to facilitate the construction of a new commercial building that also incorporates active ground floor, public access area, along with parking for both vehicles and bikes. Next. So in 2016, when the applicant first approached the Brooklyn office, the main focus of the conversation was how to accommodate a phased approach on the site that ensures a seamless transition from the current space to a new modern facility, and to accommodate on a second phase, a new office building with active ground floor that enhance the public realm of the area. While understanding the programmatic needs, we also started to discuss how the building relates to the context. Next. And this is when we took a close attention to what was proposed to happen on the ground floor. Looking at the ground floor, we were concerned on the strong presence that both parking and loading were having towards both Banker Street and Gem Street, but also how the retail spaces that were proposed on this street and on Wyeth Avenue were dissected by the open spaces that were predominantly at this point located underneath the building. So we also we were also concerned about this body along Wyeth Avenue with commercial uses was also making the character of the open space more private and internal. Next. So when we took a look with those comments, the design of the building continued to emphasize the massive continuous block while making almost imperceptible the open spaces on the ground floor, and how these open spaces related to the context. Next. So the applicant explored, after the comments provided by the Brooklyn office, the applicant explored a configuration where the parking was located on the cellar, which ended up being financially infeasible and raised resiliency issues. Additionally, still our concerns on how the open spaces and the retail uses were organized on the ground floor maintained. Next. So the team, the Brooklyn office team, asked the applicant to consider an approach where it took into account the multiple frontages uses on the whole block, while also thinking on how the open spaces not only serve their own program, but also serve as connectors to the other assets of the area, such as Bushwick Inlet Park towards the west, and how to improve the pedestrian circulation along Wyeth Avenue. For us, was also important that not only the pedestrian circulation made sense within the block and the building, but how it was also interacting with the street grid and the evolving character of Wyeth Avenue. Next. The applicant came back in late 2019 with an evolved project. In here now we see how the retail spaces were more consolidated, liberating the edges mainly on Wyeth and Gem Street to allow the provision of more public space open to the sky. improving also the visibility from the street network. Next. The site plan then emphasized from the modifications on the ground floor, allowing us now to focus on the bulk of the building. Next. Regardless of the changes and improvements that we were noticing in the ground floor, we were still concerned of the massiveness of the box on the top of this glass transition to the base levels. We did not believe this was a successful proposal from the urban design perspective, since the step downs and the fenestrations on the facade, along with the materials that they were showing at this time, made the building a very imposing presence to the context and also to the pedestrian perspective. We asked the applicant to explore strategies to break the scale of the building, also corresponding to the program that they were proposing, while keeping the accomplishments that we have achieved so far on the ground floor. Next. The applicant came back with a building that broken down in 3 segments, a base volume that relates to the Greenpoint context and that accentuates not only the entrances to the building, but also the open space in the ground floor. A subsequent building, which also has prominent recesses from the street line to accentuate the presence of the open spaces on the ground floor, maintaining the provision of the open space open to the sky, and serving as a transition to a further mass to the top floors, excuse me, which would allocate the rest of the floor area, and with greater provisions of setback in almost all the streets, making the highest floors almost imperceptible from the pedestrian perspective. Next. What resulted was a development composed of buildings which character and scale it's relating to the existing and future context, and also reflects the contemporary character that AGNI wants to achieve, both in the new facility but on the overall development. Next. DCP believes this proposal is also successful because by incorporating multiple recesses of the volumes above the base, above the base, it also improves the pedestrian experience and ensures the provision of public space open to the sky on the ground floor. Next. In response to the BP's rec on the proposal, next. The BP is asking to modify, it's suggesting to modify the bulk of the building in response to some concerns raised by the community boards and the local residents on the height study. Yeah.
Alexander, could you turn off your video because your voice is getting choppy?
Oh, my apologies. I will turn it off.
Thank you.
The BP, now it's better? Yes, okay. The BP is asking to modify the bulk of the building in response to the community board and some community board and local residents concerned on the high reach by the upper floors. Next. Within its recommendation, the BP provided multiple ways of how the floor area could be reduced on the upper floors, mainly on the portions of the building that are facing Massaro Avenue, to either setting back almost to half of the last floor, or setting back the last 3 floors several steps back. And next, thank you. And moving that floor area to the lower portions of the building, mainly the 6-story portion that it's both facing Banker and Gem Street. in response to these recommendations, the applicant provided a few observations that they would like to make to the commission. When they designed the building, part of the recesses and urban design goals that they set up for the project was to create an attractive and engagement community and tenant experience, to provide optimal lease spans in order to maximize the workplace and the planning flexibility and the daylighting of the commercial floor plates. The setbacks will also provided in order to respond to the open spaces located on the ground floor, and a goal that they have to achieve lead silver certification. So looking at the considerations based by the Brooklyn Borough President, how this will impact the design of the building, the relocation of the floor area from the top floors of the building to the lower floors will lower the lease rates, increases that 40 million annual project deficit to approximately 45 million. The deeper floor plates diminish the natural daylight penetration, and that will impact the lead occupant wellness goals and also increase their energy usage. It will require a reevaluation of the waiver scope. It will reduce the square footage of public space open to the sky, but it will maintain the overall floor area. Next. Here is a study on the daylight and energy use that the applicant provided, and how the board president's recommendations will impact negatively to that. Next. And in terms of the calculations of how much open space open to the sky will be reduced per the board's president recommendations, the applicant stated that the reduction will be almost of 36%. Next. The department also took a look at the waivers requested as part of this application, and I'm going to walk you through this graphic. So when we take a look to consider if these recommendations are within or out of scope, we take into consideration both the new zoning envelope, which is the line that is dashed in blue, and the envelope boundary that is given by the large scale special permit, which in this case is the line in purple. In the shaded purple, we can see the current waiver asked by this application. In red is how the board president is proposing to enlarge the lower portions of the building to relocate that floor area as explained before. And on the solid red is the additional waivers that will be required if these recommendations are adopted. Because of that, because of new waivers will be adopted if fully, the recommendations are considered out of scope. Next. To also to increase the size of the lower portions of the building, the volume closer to the street, it will make the building appear more massive and imposing from the public realm, and will be deleterious to the public spaces located in the ground floor. Next. Therefore, we consider that adopting in fully these recommendations will have a negative impact on the Agni business. It is also, it will produce an inferior urban design accomplished on the development, and last but not least important, it will be out of scope. That concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Alexandra. And I just want to, again, thank the commission. We so welcome getting your design comments and concerns. And frequently when we present a project like this, we've done months, if not years of homework in getting it to the point. And so I welcome your questioning and giving us the opportunity to go back and show our homework, show what it is that we've done in shaping a project before it gets to the point of certification. And that's especially the case when it is a large scale, where we have the ability to do so much more shaping than in a straight rezoning. We also took seriously the recommendations from the borough president and again took advantage of our urban design abilities to be able to model. Even though it was out of scope, we still thought it helpful to model and determine whether the design should be reconsidered. So with that background, I'll toss it open to the commission. Commissioner Burney.
Yeah, I mean, I guess since I started a lot of this discussion last time, I should probably say something about it. I must say, Alexandra, I really respect all the time you guys have spent on this. Goodness me, since September 2018, and I agree with all of your discussion and findings about the street level and the open space. Mm-hmm. But as it comes, in terms of the massing of the overall building, I don't think height was ever really an issue, and I can see why the borough president's recommendations are not really workable. But it's interesting, I mean, looking at the presentation you just made, I have to say, I think the 2018 and 2019 designs were better, were just better architecture. Mm-hmm. So this may be a case of just too many cooks ruining the soup. And I, don't want to be one of those cooks. So I will probably hold my peace from here on. So, but thanks for all the work that you do.
And thank you, Commissioner Burney. We benefit from being pushed, being challenged, being prodded. It's why we so welcome the expertise of the commission. So we would welcome your support of what we think is a great industrial project retaining a manufacturer, but please keep pushing and prodding us.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great project in every other respect. I'm just commenting on whether we're going to win an AIA award, which I think we're probably not, but everything else is great.
Yeah, and I want to add of what Marisa said, we take very seriously our work as urban designers within our agency, and your concerns also are, we also take them very seriously. We're talking in the applicants for a very first phase and making them aware of how diverse is the expertise and the considerations that the commission takes when evaluating the project. So I, as an urban designer, please keep them coming. They support our practice.
Okay, thank you, Alexandra.
All right, and last on our agenda for post-hearing follow-up, 86 Fleet Place. I will just note that I think we've had this on the agenda now for a while, and we're getting close to scheduling it for a vote. So any further questions on it, let us know.
Which one was that, Ryan?
This is the 86 Fleet Place. It's a text amendment in near downtown Brooklyn to allow a greater variety of uses on the ground floor. Yeah. That's the last of our agenda.
Okay, well then we will assemble for the next time on Wednesday for our public hearing. And until then, stay warm. Bye.
Bye, guys.